So, welcome to this episode of Women in Rugby League, the Pioneering Years. I'm loving this bit. I loved doing the other project, Proud of the around with the life of the Lionesses, but this is really going back in history and really beginning to look at the roots of Women's Rugby League when it all began. And there's no one that knows more about the roots of Rugby League, particularly in Sheffield, than our guest today, Tracy Solman. Welcome, Tracy.
Thank you very much for having me.
We've just had a fabulous conversation already about the past and who was involved and not, and all those sort of things. And you were involved from the start at Sheffield, and people often
Absolutely.
think the south of Yorkshire and there's no rugby league. And what I want to dispel is those myths around one the South Yorkshire, but particularly sort of Sheffield, and actually tell the story of how many fabulous women were actually playing in those 1980s and onwards. That then obviously went into internationals. It was like a hotbed for producing players. So we're going to uncover all that today. So first of all, Tracy, tell us a bit more about Sheffield. You know, where you were born. How did you get involved in rugby league? And
Okay. So actually, as you might have guessed with my accent, although I've lived here for a long, long time, I was born in a place called Bushy near Watford in Hertfordshire. But my rugby interest goes back to the fact that my father and my uncles played at a very high level rugby union for Wasps.
oh
So I was
wow,
very familiar with rugby, watching rugby,
yeah.
going to Wembley to watch things like the Rugby Sevens in the 1960s, and being surrounded by a family that would talk about rugby. So I was up in Sheffield in the 1980s. Came to Sheffield University. I'd also done postgraduate degree. Then I went into teaching and was doing my teaching, my PGCE, when I came across Daryl Powell and Mark Aston from Sheffield Eagles, who were coming into schools to promote the newly formed Sheffield Eagles men's rugby team. And they were coming into schools, as I say to you, to promote rugby and hopefully try and set up a firm sort of rugby base. And this was organized we had a rugby league development officer called Tim Butcher. So Tim Butcher was getting these players into schools to promote rugby league. And it was whilst they were at a school, I can tell you which one, it was Crooksmoor Junior School in the spring and summer of 1989, that Tim Butcher, the Rugby League Development Officer, was setting up some competitions and wanted some tag rugby teams. And we had a competition one evening up at High Green stroke Ecclesfield. It was somewhere in the north of Sheffield. And that's really the start of the women's team. That particular evening, I managed to get a few friends together. We were so short of players, I can remember. There was a female dog walker walking around the park. We tied up her dog and got her on the pitch. But we enjoyed that so much that when I saw Tim again the following week at school, expressed the desire to sort of continue and see what we could do. And I have to say that Tim was absolutely all for it. So I spoke to Tim. He suggested another teacher that he knew that he thought would be good, um, Sue Jackson, who was doing her teaching practice at another school. She came from Hull and was a Hull Kings. I better get this right. She
She
was
was.
one
You're right.
Hull Eastern
She
Rovers. I
is a
mustn't
red and
get the
white. Yeah.
wrong Hull team supporter. So she knew about rugby. I had a boyfriend at the time who worked at Westfield Sports Centre, and that's where we gained Tracy Hughes, who was a tremendous player. She at the time was playing for Sheffield Hatters basketball team. So we were getting together people who had got interests and played for different sports. So we had a sort of a nucleus of a team. I put adverts in the Sheffield Star and Sheffield Telegraph and organised. We used to hire a court up at what was then Westfield school, I think, or my a school, central South Sheffield somewhere. I don't think that matters too much, but we got evening practices, and the adverts drew in a couple of people who in turn had friends. So we had a team. We got a coach again through Tim Butcher, a lad by the name of Gumel, who would also, he didn't come up in a previous conversation, would also be, you know, a very good person to talk to. And hence we had our team. And I went to meetings, and I can remember driving to places like Keighley, as there were a lot of new teams starting to form a women's team. And I can remember our very first match was at Castleford, and we'd got in, as I say, we were always, and this was a sort of a story of Sheffield really, not being a team from what I would call a heartland area of rugby league, like Leeds, like Wakefield, like Dewsbury. We were always sort of struggling for players. And I can remember we went off to Castleford, and the ball got kicked, and this young girl in our team caught the ball. She was a girlfriend of the mascot at Sheffield Eagles, so she wasn't sporty. The kick was a fantastic kick. Her catch was tremendous, and then she went and threw the ball forward. So anyway, we were off, and that was it. I can remember some of the teams were truly great from the off. I think it was Wakefield Panthers. Have I got that right?
Yeah, you have.
I
Yeah.
remember playing them in Sheffield, and you know, in the early days, I can remember in the first half of the first time we ever played them, we were holding them, and then you know, we used to just sort of capitulate. It's just a story of us, really. But yeah, that's how we got going, and then the league became more formal. And then I can remember we would have to go off to places like Barrow. We would have to go down to London. You know, there were some fair journeys involved. But at that time, Sheffield Council would let you hire out or even borrow, I don't even think we had to pay for it, a minibus. And I had got my minibus, I think I got my minibus license, or had to go and do a minibus test, passed that. So I ended up driving the minibus quite a bit, but you know, tremendously good fun, really good fun. Or if we didn't get the minibus, we'd use our cars, but great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you can't beat actually, that comradeship, can you,
Oh,
of
absolutely.
that going all traveling down together,
Yeah.
particularly when it's long distance. It sounds
Yeah.
horrendous, but actually it's a great team bonding, isn't it?
Bonding thing. Great
And the
fun.
stories.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what number aside did you play at that time? Can you remember how
I
many were on
think
a team?
actually we had to negotiate sometimes because we literally only had 9 players. We
Mm,
never had subs, which was a bit of a disaster for our team because, of course, teams like Halifax and Keith, you know, they had more players than us. But no, other teams were very, very good and would
mm.
agree. So that was all right. And over the years built up. Yeah,
Yeah. It's because you did build up into playing 13 aside, didn't
we
you?
did.
When
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And that was great. We had, you know, some good coaches. I can remember we had a lad called Dean who came over from New Zealand. Actually, he's now Tracy Hughes' husband, I believe. Um, and you know, with a strong then knowledge of rugby league and the
yeah,
positions that we needed to be. And we used to train on a Wednesday night and a Friday night, and you know, and it was good.
yeah. Good fun.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what were the attitudes about the team being set up, the women's team being set up then?
Well, obviously, Tim Butcher, the rugby league development officer, was thrilled. You know, he
Mm,
couldn't have been more supportive. He really was supportive. At that time, Gary Hetherington was still trying to raise the profile of the Sheffield Eagles team. And I think he was more bemused. I think it was a difficult sort of concept for him to get round. But I can remember one sort of awful, awful moment among many when we tried to get shirts and we tried to get sponsorship. And I think Gary had agreed to these shirts, but we had to pay £500 or something, which was
wow.
in those days a lot of money. And we were getting sponsored by a firm of plastic pipe makers. One of the girls worked there or something. And I can remember giving Gary the check, and I think the check bounced, and it was just awful. And actually, to his credit, I think he let us keep those shirts.
Yeah.
So that's really hurtful, because that's how bad it was. We didn't even have a kit. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So did you play in the Sheffield Eagles kits then?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Great.
So under the Sheffield Eagles badge, and how supportive? So you've sort of said Gary was a bit bemused. Did you get much sort of support from the Sheffield Eagles as a club?
Well, certainly, Daryl Powell, more so Mark Aston, because I can remember Mark um, taking time out to teach us how to kick the ball over the posts. And I can remember when we used to do presentation evenings, and I can remember one year Mark came out in his own time and did that for us. So that was,
Mm.
very, very good. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? So
Yeah.
did you come across anyone that thought women shouldn't play then? Were there any barriers to you being able to play?
There were. I can remember that Tim Butcher had decided it would be a good idea if all of us passed our rugby league coaching certificates, and we had to go up to Leeds. And I can remember there was a coach from Castleford. He was okay, he was quite supportive, but there were some other men there who actually were sort of open, I would say openly hostile, really didn't want us there. But, it was, I would say 50-50.
Yeah, yeah. And how did you manage that then at the time?
Well, to be honest with you, I didn't find it easy. But I just had to keep going. The team meant so much to me, and we were having a great time as the team, that I didn't want it. I didn't want to be put off. And actually, almost made me more determined to
Yeah, yeah,
continue.
yeah.
So, but it wasn't all easy, and it wasn't all plain sailing. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting, isn't it, when you have that resistance, and it might not
yeah.
necessarily, although that sounds like it was open resistance.
Uh,
Sometimes it's resistance that you don't realize is there that you
yeah,
haven't encountered, isn't it?
yeah. But times have changed, and great. When you put on the TV now and can see teams playing, fantastic.
I know, and it's great to see, isn't it? And I think when
Yeah.
you look at those early years of the pitches you played on, the organisation of the team, getting referees,
Oh,
um,
I can remember some of these early pitches and early places. I can remember going to Rochdale to play. Rochdale always had a good team. And I mean, it was it was sort of like a farmer's sort of field, and there were traveller horses and traveller horse mess on the pitch. I mean, you look back and it was incredible. I can remember things like the showers and this girl taking in her pit bull terrier into the showers, all sorts of
what
stories.
to clean it?
Yeah, well, we were all showering. what yeah, yeah. And I remember, I think it was at Halifax, we used to have the big, what I would term old-fashioned baths, which was almost like
Yeah,
mini swimming pool, where you'd all sit in, after the match. And I can remember we were all quite a meek and ladylike sort of team in Sheffield, and it was always intimidating even after the matches, but great fun too.
yeah, absolutely. So you organised your own presentation nights.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit more about those. And
So we used to vote amongst ourselves, or the people that came to support us as well, for best player, best new player, etc. And we would then hire out. I can remember one year we did it in I think it's the Red Lion off Mappin Street. I'm not quite sure I've got the pub name right, but in pubs or
right near
clubs.
Hillsborough.
No, that was Central Sheffield.
Ah, right.
Hillsborough
Okay.
came later,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
Hillsborough actually came much later in
yeah,
terms of where we were training. We used to train in Attercliffe at Woodburn Road for a
yeah.
while. That was a very new complex at the time, so that became good. As I've said to you, we were at schools. We went down to South Sheffield as well. We were quite nomadic in our early days, and obviously wanted to cut costs as well. And we used to train in Sharrow, had an open sort of sports area that we would train on too,
Mm.
way before we then went to Hillsborough. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you remember playing sort of in the league and the challenge cut and competitions? Can you
Yeah.
remember the types of competitions you played
Yeah.
in?
Yeah, I can. Um, so we would have those sort of competitions. I can't particularly think of one match, but I do remember we also, in the very early days, the men's teams were good enough to give us curtain raisers, which was always good because then we'd be seen and people would know. I can remember at one point, because Sheffield Eagles men's team were quite nomadic as well. They played at Sheffield United, and I can remember playing the curtain raiser at Sheffield United.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, on the football pitch there. I think Sheffield Eagles also, this is the men's team, had to play at Chesterfield Football Club. And I can remember playing there. I can remember, and that was good. That was very good exposure, and of course brought more interest to us. I would also say that the Sheffield newspapers were good to us. There was a journalist called Mike Firth at Sheffield Telegraph, um, who would always print in. As I say, I used to do a write-up of the matches and try and sort of drop it off. I mean, you can't believe pre-email and all the rest, can you? Nowadays, it was so easy. And used to write up bits that would go into the program, the Sheffield Eagles men's program at their matches. And they would put photographs in as well. So we did. We got some coverage. It was good.
Yeah, they were showing us, weren't they,
Yeah,
the other day? We had a meeting the other day, weren't they? And then they sent
yeah,
us on. I don't know if you got copied in
I
the
did. Yeah.
actual excerpts of the programs, which will have been your work.
Woo!
So you're down in history because when you're doing a project like this, that is
Yeah,
just so important to
yeah,
tell the story, isn't it? Because it
yeah.
gives the score and the scorers and the
Gosh.
teams
Yeah, yeah.
and the
So
photographs. And you're one of my gems who's kept stuff.
we hope.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. No, it's
yeah,
brilliant.
yeah.
So, I mean, you had highs and lows, didn't you? And lots of have you got any sort of special memories? I mean, I know it's difficult because when we were talking, you said, "Oh, I've got so many," but is there any that really stand out?
Well, do you know what stands out from doing what we did way back in the 80s? For me, what stands out is that I made friends, and these friends I still have to this very day. And these are close friends, and that was formed way back then as part of being that team. I also then became much more fitness aware and went on. I was very sad. I think, the first one in our team that had a baby. So I played when I was pregnant, I didn't tell people. That was terrible, wasn't it? But my son, who's 30, has come to no harm. But realised when I'd got my children that I really just couldn't manage young children, and took up jujitsu. And I'm pleased to say that I got to my black belt, and I
Wow.
became a teacher of jujitsu, entered a lot of competitions and did very well. And I would never have done that had it not been for rugby. And the third thing that for me has come out of this is the fact that there are now still people, women playing. And that's super. It's bittersweet in some ways because, of course, we would have loved that. We didn't have the
Yeah.
exposure, etc.
And
But
when you see that exposure, it's just, I don't know about you, but it warms my heart to think,
yeah, it's
you
great.
know, it's great,
Yeah.
isn't it, to see them as role models and
You
and
know,
women.
yeah. The funny thing is, as well, as a team, we did go. A lot of us went on to have children, and we just had boys. So there were never girls that we could sort of throw back into the system. But there you go.
So how many years did you play then, Tracy?
Me, I played from something like 1989 to 1994, 5 years.
Yeah. And the team, we were just working out, weren't we, when it became from Sheffield Eagles into Sheffield Hillsborough
See,
Eagles.
I didn't really know too much
Yeah,
about that. Yeah,
yeah,
post my time.
yeah. And as you say, those players, you're sort of still in touch. So when you look back at what's your proudest moment, do you think?
There were so many, but actually,
Just look at your
it was.
smile.
I know it wasn't. It wasn't like we weren't good. We would go off. We were sort of bottom. Because we were truly up against it in all senses down in Sheffield because Brad, I can remember the Bradford team had so much backing, and we never had that sort of backing that we just couldn't on sort of all levels compete, if you know what I mean.
Mm.
Although the team went on, certain members of the team went on to achieve, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
greatness in
I
rugby.
think
So
there's something like 5 or 6 Great
yeah,
Britain internationals
yes,
from the
from that
Sheffield
team.
teams. Yeah,
So,
yeah,
how brilliant is that? But in the early days, as I said to you, we were always scratching for players. So there is no proudest, but I'm just, happy that I was involved. I said,
yeah.
well, the,
I'm
what
sure
I
you would have beaten Fulham women, wouldn't you?
Actually, I
Yeah,
think we did. But do you know
yeah.
something? Tracy Hughes, who was playing on the wing, was so fast that the referee kept thinking she was offside when she was scoring, and in the end, it had to be pointed out to him that he was getting it wrong and that we were whizzing down the wing. But there you are. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, because I was very involved in the initiation of Fulham Women, and then I know Miriam Karen continued
Miriam.
along with the others.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
such lovely memories. But I think they struggled to win a game, so that's why I know that you probably beat them.
Well, we were down there with them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And it's just lovely, isn't it? When we when we had that meeting and everybody started talking about the memories and the
yeah,
history and their achievements and
mm,
various other things. It was just lovely to look back on
yes,
and actually, they are the pioneering years. Without those
yeah,
years that, and it's hard yards to
yeah,
talk in rugby league terms, you're
it
scratching
is.
for a team, yes, you
Yeah,
had some support, but actually you were battling against a lot of,
yeah,
well, why should women play rugby
yeah,
league? Women
yeah,
shouldn't be playing rugby league, should I
really,
say,
yeah,
was quite a few attitudes, isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah.
Um, but
At one point, I was in a house in Sheffield as a student house, and in there was a film script writer. It was early days, and I can remember he phoned me. I've forgotten his name. That's really bad. But he went on, he was tossing up whether to do a film about Sheffield steel workers, you know where I'm going with this,
yeah, yeah.
or Sheffield Eagles women's rugby league team. Can you imagine if we'd
Ah.
consented and been the full Monty of the women's rugby league? That would have been a absolutely superb film, but there we go.
Yeah, well, I do think there's a real story in all of this that we're
Yeah,
collecting, and
yeah,
the fact that you know
yeah. So
women
you,
got
yeah.
together in those communities and those friendships afterwards.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite interesting. So when I saw him again, he was on the red carpet in Hollywood collecting his Oscar for best screenplay or whatever film. But it would have been a great film to have followed a women's rugby league team in those
Yeah,
days. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it would have been, particularly with
Yeah.
the antics and everything.
Yeah.
And do you remember? Did you go to any of the Blackpool presentations?
That I think that was when I was having my first son, because I can remember the talk of what happened at the Blackpool presentations and the fun they had then. I can remember you've just triggered a memory that we did have training weekends and we went the other way. We went over to Bridlington for some training weekends. So,
Oh,
we
wow.
got a lot going. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And as you say, it's like a community, isn't it?
Yeah.
So when you're looking back now, and you've already said that the things that it sort of added to your life, and when you look at women's sport now, and particularly women's rugby league,
Mhm.
what do you feel about the part you've played?
Well, if it has helped the women of today get to where they are and their ability to play easily, to play without prejudice, then That's great, isn't it? You
That's
know,
job done. And
yeah,
Tracy, you are
yeah,
one of our pioneers. And I say that from the bottom of my
yeah.
heart. And
Oh,
and we've
bless
been
you.
talking around how you can get
Yeah,
back involved in the sport.
yes, you're great.
And we would love to have you. That's part of this project is re-engagement and that
Mhm.
passion and love for the
Yeah,
sport, re-engaging that. And we'd love to
yeah,
have you back and part of it. And as I
yeah.
say, you are one of the pioneers. And thank you for everything that you've done
Oh,
and all
well,
the hard work.
well, Julia, thank you very much for talking to me today.
My pleasure.